My name is Martin Hamilton. I'm Director of Leeds Civic Trust. And also on behalf of the Thoresby Society, because this is a joint event, I'm delighted to welcome you this evening to this lecture on the remarkable story of Hunslet, covering the first 50 years or so of the 19th century. And I'm delighted, of course, to welcome the main man, Steve Burt, who is on my left. I'm not quite sure where he is on your screen. Steve, I'm not going to introduce you. I'd like you to say a couple of words about yourself and what sort of led you to write this particular book before we actually launch into the talk. So can I say a few words?
Absolutely. Well, I would like to just say modesty is my middle name, really. I should hate to say that. The reason I wrote this book is very, very, very straightforward. I used to work for Education Leeds, and one of my jobs was as area manager for south of the city. And I'd worked with Kevin Grady on the illustrated history of Leeds, and so arrogantly thought, well, I know this city, till I went and actually worked over there. And I was always amazed at the richness of the built heritage in that area and realized that actually I didn't know an awful lot about that area. And as I went traveling from school to school, you went from one end, the Stank Hall Barn end and Morley Town Hall, right the way across to Woodhouse Hill and the remarkable cemetery there. So when I retired from the Royal Armouries, I thought I actually would like to find out a lot more about South Leeds. So I've actually done what I call a brain dump on Beeston and Holbeck, but the one I wanted to start with was Hunslet, because I had such a rich, warm welcome from the people of Hunslet. I thought, oh, this is going to be fascinating. But what I hadn't realised at that point was the wealth of primary material that was available for that out township of Leeds. And I think because there's been so many great books written on the engineering, etc., of that area, I thought, well, there must be more to it. And actually, it is quite staggering. And I'm hoping I'm going to share my enthusiasm for Hunslet with you with the lecture I've put together. So I won't be dwelling on the engineering elements of it, because that's been well written by others. What I'm hoping to do is show you just what a remarkable place it is, and just how fantastic the people were who made this place so important.
Brilliant. Well, what I would say is I've heard this lecture already. We did a practice run last week and it is absolutely fantastic. So, you know, I would urge you to make sure your Wi-Fi is working properly and make sure you've got enough tea and coffee to sustain you for the next hour, because this really is a fantastic lecture. If you want to raise any questions or points during the course of the talk, please do so using the chat function, and I will try and pick those up at the end. We'll have a short period at the end to pick up on any questions and comments. But without further ado, Stephen, it's over to you. I'll turn my camera off. I'll mute myself. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, let's hope the technology works. It does. My sleepless night is now over. Well, welcome everybody. This lecture celebrates the fact that Kevin Grady and I have just published, after a decade of research, the remarkable story of Hunslet. And I've chosen 1800 to 1850 because this really was a critical period of change for this out township of Leeds, when it actually became more important than places like Dewsbury, Pontefract, Barnsley. And at the end of the period was at the cusp of challenging places like Wakefield, Halifax and Huddersfield in terms of its population. But I thought before we start, we ought to try and just get our bearings. So my friends at Leeds City Council gave me permission to use this absolutely fantastic aerial photograph of Hunslet in 1970. And I thought it'd be useful to just get our bearings. The orange arrow there is Morrison's, the Penny Hill Centre. And then the red arrow to the left, that is St Mary's, the spire of which still survives today. And the purple arrow at the bottom is where Hunslet Road and Low Road are. And then one of the key things that you'll note throughout this lecture is just how important transport is to this story. And so at the bottom right, we've got the old Wakefield to Leeds Turnpike. The grey-blue arrow points to the Leeds to Derby Railway of 1840. Then the mustard arrow points to the motorway of the 70s. So you can see that Hunslet is one of those places through which all these strands of transport pass. And it has in many ways not only spurred on development in Hunslet, but it's also later divided that community. Now, as we shall see in a minute, the original village of Hunslet stretched from the red arrow down to the purple arrow, and that was known as Chapel Street. And that was there at the time of Doomsday. And its alignment is interesting because it was deliberately aligned to go down to the ford at the bottom, which took you across the river towards the road to York, but also importantly to many of the pasture lands, which throughout the whole of the medieval period were part of the Hunslet agricultural system. One of the places I'm going to be enthusing about is Bauer's glasswork, because the man who constructed it, Joshua Bauer, was somewhat of a character. I think the nearest I could come to would be Les Dorset. And then at the bottom, I'm trying to dispel myths. And when you mention Hunslet, many people think, well, oh, it's a working class area. In that period, from the 17th right the way through to the early 19th century, it had millionaires living in Hunslet. And one of the most magnificent houses I've marked here is Grove Cottage. And that is, the grounds were spectacular, and very tragically, that disappeared under what was to become Leeds Steelworks. So now we've got our bearings, let's look at some of the historic maps. This is the wonderful John Tuke map of 1781 that Leeds Museums and Galleries have kindly let me use. And what you see here marked with M is Morrison's, which I think is a great way to find your way around this area. Number 1 is Chapel Street, which I just showed. Number 2 on the side there, what you have is Hunslet Moorside, overlooking the moor there. 3 is Hunslet Car. And number 4, Woodhouse Hill. These little hamlets, these were small agricultural communities. Across to number 5, those who know Hunslet know the road which is called Hunslet Hall Road. And where the Salvation Army Hall is today was number 5, which was Hunslet Hall, a manor house of Hunslet, which I'll be speaking more about at a lecture at the Leeds Film and Lit later in the year. Number 6 is a suburb, the first real suburb of Leeds, a marked Leeds Bridge there, and very shortly you'll be seeing a house called Sundial House, and that's exactly where that was located. Then you come to number 7, peppered across this agricultural landscape of Hunslet in this late Georgian period were a series of very elegant Georgian mansions, such as Elm Tree House and Leafley Lodge, I'll be showing you shortly. But this area was one where, shall we say, the Anglican Church at times was not too popular with the working classes, and one of its strengths was Methodism. And you have at number 8 there, just off Chapel Street, the Methodist Meeting House. Now, in terms of population, it really burgeoned in that period, 1801 to 1851. For those people who were used to the agricultural settlement of Hunslet, one whereby there was the odd coal mine, there was the Leeds potteries, of course, which were famous at the time. You had as well domestic cloth industry. So you had the clothier working for this family, a bit of out working. You've got the odd merchant there, but this was very settled times. This became a turbulent period of change. And what you had was the population growing from 5,799 to 19,466, virtually a four-fold increase. And I think you need to just look as well at the acreage covered by Hunslet in that period. Hunslet was only just over 1,000 acres. Leeds was 2.5 times the size of that, Holbeck half the size. But look at Chapel Allerton and Headingley, these vast, sparsely populated area. What a contrast to what Hunslet was to become. As we shall see, the other element of the course is all those people, many in the early period coming from the surrounding West Riding area and then from much further afield. So you're beginning to get those coming from Lincolnshire, Scotland, Ireland, all flocking in to try and get gainful employment in the new factories, the wonders of their age, using all the new mechanization, these new wonderful pieces of machinery. And the Reverend Edward Parsons, in his History of Leeds, states in 1834, Hunslet Township now contains as many inhabitants as many of the cities and cathedral towns of the kingdom, and is superior to them in wealth and in intrinsic importance. Now, we are so lucky to have such a wealth of pictorial imagery for Hunslet in this period. And this is one of the most spectacular views. It says at the bottom there, Leeds from Rope Hill, circa 1840. Well, one of the great pieces of information we managed to elicit during the research was that this painting by the Frenchman Alphonse Dussault was almost certainly done, not in 1840, but much earlier. And it is probably about 1827, 1830. It wonderfully portrays the changes that are taking place in the landscape of Hunslet in that late Georgian period, the arrival of the mills, the foundries, the chemical works, the glass works, and the effects of all the new roads and the trebling of the houses within that township. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. What you can see here at number 6, one of the great features of the period was the fact that what had been Hunslet Moor, where political meetings in the 1820s, you had approximately 30,000 people gathering on this moor. Well, bit by bit, this moor began to diminish in size, and much more of it went across to market gardening to provide food not only for the people of Hunslet, but also Leeds and the surrounding areas. And what you find is that many of the pubs of Hunslet, and drinking is a theme which comes time and again into Hunslet, is that the occupation is reflected in the name of the pub. And how lucky are we to still have the Gardener's Arms and the Garden Gate, which reflect where the workers slaving away on these market gardens went for their pint at lunchtime and at the end of their long day. In the middle of there, you have Jossie Bauer's Glassworks, more of in a minute. The 8 is the moor that I've mentioned. Then you've got 9, Hunslet Moorside. 10, you're heading towards the our side. And then 11, what you can see there is just how packed by 1830 that area had become. And I'll be telling you more about housing later. The great thing to stress was the huge contrast between the wealthy and those who were poverty-stricken. And for those that were in work, the boom-to-bust economy meant that at one moment you were fine, but at the next minute, you could find yourself really, really struggling. Now, on my first slide, I showed the location of Grove Cottage and its location near St. Mary's Church. And why I start with this is because this really shows you the extent of these lovely gardens that were associated with this. Grove Cottage, what a misnomer. This was the home of Ard Walker. I think the best way to describe Ard Walker, the wine and spirit merchant, was like Mr. Majestic or Mr. Weatherspoon. He had made an absolute fortune out of this, and he had married well. He had married into the Story family, and John Story had built, and if you look to the bottom right of the screen, you can see the great pond there, the lake fed by Barn Beck. What you have there originally was the first of Leeds's cotton mills, built in 1787. But in 1800, Ard Walker, who'd inherited the mill from his father-in-law, decided to knock it down and build a huge 5-story cotton mill on the site. And he was very proud, as many of these industrialists were, of what they were creating. So you've got to look to the top where Grove Cottage is and think of the mansion house at Roundhay. As you go to the, as you go out of his door, to the side was the stables, the brew house, the laundry. You then passed his 2 hothouses on the circular path down to his lawned area and his summer house. We know from John Killingbeck telling us about this property that there was a boathouse at the side where the family went boating, that there were swans on it, and wildfowl regularly came here to rest on their way to pastures new. But he was not alone, this multimillionaire in our parlance. What we have here is another of the great family houses of Hunslet. This is Leithley Lodge, better known to you as Costco. And this particular home was built by John Leithley, the great cloth merchant, a member of the Corporation of Leeds, whose daughter married Edward Armitage, and again, another of the great Hunslet families. And Edward Armitage married his daughter and took over this property. And like so many, he was already a merchant and a land agent, but he now went into the malt production as well. And he's the gentleman who ends up at Farnley Hall, one of the largest properties in the whole of Leeds. And why I love these coloured maps, and I need to thank the Leeds Philosophical and Literary Society for paying for these being done so well. But what it does, it shows you the extent of these properties. And you can see Leithley Lodge there with the formal gardens in front of it, behind it, the hothouse, the extensive grassland to the side, the nice tree-lined walks going towards the hotbed. But you can also see, just as we had Ard Walker with his cotton mills very proud of it, here he's very proud of his malt kilns. Or how about another contrast? Here we've got Grove House. This was the house on Pepper Lane, which was truly magnificent. The only picture I could find of it was this small newspaper, which was from the Thoresby Society archive, which actually shows it just shortly before its demolition. But in 1849, this was the home of Joseph Middleton, one of the great barristers of Leeds, who surrounded his house with lilac and laburnum trees. Just look at his. He's got 2 fish ponds, and like the others, surrounded his estate with fine trees and gardens. Now, his rural idyll was ruined by Joshua Bower, and Joshua Bower, expanding from his glassworks, went into mining, bought the field at the bottom of his garden and put a coal mine there, which then depreciated the value of the property, which he then purchased at knockdown price and put his son in there. So it's a place of contrast. Those slides are showing just how wealthy people were. But at the other extreme, there were those who struggled, those who were trying to find their way in the changing world. The one whereby the traditional domestic system, where clothiers produced their cloth in their own homes with the help of spinners in other little cottages nearby, to one where the mechanization of the woolen industry had meant that these were no longer economically viable. And so what you have is a deterioration in the job opportunities for them, and their independence is eroded. Because if they want to work with cloth, if they want to carry on as a weaver, they have to make their way to the mills where they have to clock on and clock off. And I mentioned earlier the great richness which we have in the number of maps for Hunslet in this period. This one is based on Johnson and Sedgwick's plan of 1791. It's the updated version which was made for the assessment of poor regulators. But what I want to stress is, look how thin the number of houses are, and look at the extent of agriculture at the start of the period. What you get in that period, 1800 to 1850, are two sets of working class housing which are developed. There are those that are thrown up in a hurry, like these in Finney's Yard. These are single room, single story, brick built houses with stone thatched roof. And then if you look to the left and the right of these pictures, what you have are the middens. There is no water for these houses nearby. They actually had to go to Barmbek at the side, and near Barmbek was a spring which had been used since medieval times and was famed for the quality of its water. But as the Industrial Revolution drove on, that water becomes very polluted, and that's part of the story later on. Parsons again says, besides woolen manufactures, Hunslet contains extensive glassworks, large chemical factories, considerable potteries, and establishments for wireworking. And all those are based on cheap coal. Hunslet itself had within its bounds many mines. And you, again, if you look to the street names, these reflect it. Pitfield Street, Lady Pitt Lane. But in addition to those, because the demand for coal became so great, what they did was they also brought coal from Middleton, and again, a very well-trodden path, which I don't intend to repeat. It's about the story of the wagon way from Middleton Colliery to Leeds. But I put Walker's view, the wonderful watercolour painting of the miner here with the Middleton mine workings in the background, because, of course, in some respects, Hunslet is the Silicon Valley of the Georgian period, where revolutionary new machinery can be actually seen and viewed. And it brings some great visitors to Hunslet from across the world. What you have here, of course, is the world's first commercially successful railway engine, built to the designs of John Blenkinsop by Matthew Merry. But the key thing here is, because of the rail link, you could get coal at absolute rock bottom prices, which was a great incentive to those who wish to harness the new technology. And Leeds was, in a way, following the example of the great cotton magnates across the Pennines, who were becoming multimillionaires because of the technology. Now, in Hunslet were a whole raft of wealthy people who had a foot almost in both camps. And this is certainly true of the Goodman family. And what you've got here is Benjamin Goodman, 1763 to 1848, who had made a fortune under the original domestic system as a wool stapler, buying wool, sorting and grading it before selling it on to manufacturers. And he was a traditionalist. He was the last man in Leeds who wore a pigtail. But like the others, he had strong religious views. He was a Baptist and gave land for his family gave land for the Baptist church, which still, of course, is a great feature of Hunslet today. And around 1790, bought the Sundial House estate just across Leeds Bridge as part of that new suburb on the borders of Leeds and Hunslet. But it's to his son, George Goodman, 1792 to 1859, who starts in his father's footsteps as a wool stapler and then diversifies, but he invests in railways, and he plays a critical role in bringing the railway through Hunslet to the station. And this was the Leeds to Derby line, which opens in 1840. He has other claims to fame. He was, in actual fact, the first mayor of the Reformed Corporation, and you see him there in all his civic regalia with gold dripping everywhere, and the great Leeds mace by Maney there on the table. He was to become knighted, and after he was Liberal MP for Leeds in 1852. And this is his mansion house, the one of his father. If you look above the main door there, you will see a sundial. And what Peter Breers, my great friend, has done here is recreate from the maps and the photographs of it prior to demolition this stunning view. But what he also identified is the room to the left of your screen is the ballroom. It was spectacular. Now, the Thoresby Society has the most wonderful collection of material relating to the history of Leeds, and one of its finest is this, which is the Fowler Plan of 1831. And it shows at the top, just where it says Hunslet Lane, just there you have what is the Larchfield estate. And this, you probably know, if you know Brain Pressings, it was to the rear of where Brain's Pressings is today. And this site was developed by an Irishman called Tim Nevins, who'd been born in Kilglassin Island and was absolutely fascinated by the new methods of production and how it could be applied to wool. And he developed the Larchfield site, called Larchfield, named after the trees which he planted. And he was exceptionally proud of his works, which went on to employ 550 people. Think of that, a huge number, making one of the most beautiful woolen cloths available anywhere. It was said that it gleamed and had the beauty of satin and velvet. And just like Ard Walker, he was proud of his works and wanted to live on its bounds. And then just to the centre of the screen, you have Hunslet Glassworks, Bowers Glassworks, and to the left of that, the workhouse which everyone wished to avoid going in. So let's drill down and look in more detail at this Larchfield estate. This comes from West Yorkshire Archives collection, absolutely stunning view. And what you see in red to the centre of the screen is that mill complex, which had both fulling, scribbling, dressing mills, engine houses, dry houses, dye houses, weaving and burling shops. And then to the side by the road there, what you have is Larchfield House and the formal gardens which stretched round to Larchfield Cottage. And of course, the Nevins family lived here. Now, the thing is with them, the quality of that cloth really did attract visitors from across the world. To the left of screen, you have the future Tsar Nicholas of Russia, who actually came to visit Larchfield Mills and stayed with Tim Nevins in his house and gave the most beautiful gift to Nevin's daughter as a token of his thanks. One of the great frustrations was I couldn't find either a picture of Tim Nevins nor that gift. So again, research has to continue to see if we can locate this. But cloth, woolen cloth made in Hunslet was exported all over the world, and particularly its blankets became extremely well known. Later, the Hudson Bay blankets. Why? Because they were so well made, they were so warm, and they wore well. And one of the great things about every one of these industrialists was their strength of religious belief. Nevins was a Quaker, and when he traveled across to America, he went to a place called New York, where he met the Seneca Indians and was utterly and absolutely appalled at their treatment. And because of that, he actually supported them, he gave financial support and invited them to visit him at his home in Hunslet. So if we've Nevins using pioneering technology there at Larchfield Mills, others were to follow. We've already seen that Story had invested in cotton mills, others were to follow his examples, and including here, the Coupland family. And again, street names in Hunslet are still named after this Coupland family, and their mills were just off the Leeds Wakefield Turnpike off Low Road. Now, in the period 1800 to 1810, these mills were doing exceptionally well. The family were doing so well, they buy large houses in Hunslet, they furnish them in the latest fashion. But by 1821, the kinds of material that they're making in Hunslet have gone out of fashion, and as the trade declines, they become bankrupt. And in the book, you'll be able to read every one of the contents of the Coupland household, because they went bust, and they had the indignity of people trampling around their houses, actually looking at what they could purchase, how the mighty have fallen. And this must have been one of the great worries of the risk takers of the period. Again, in Thoresby, what's wonderful is we have a whole series of sketchbooks by artists like Cope, who we'll meet later in the lecture, and also Dixon. This is one of Joshua Bauer. This is him in later life. And he's one of my favourite characters because he went from rags to riches. He saw his opportunity as the building boom started. And booming Hunslet needed glass, and it needed a lot of it, just as Leeds did down the road. Glass needs a great deal of coal, 50 tons a day at his works. How cheap could he get it? Very cheaply, because up the road was Middleton Colliery, and virtually on his doorstep were coal mines as well. I'm going to call him the Richard Branson of his age. He became a billionaire because not only did he have his glassworks, he invested in collieries. He became the largest owner of toll roads in the entire country, and he was nicknamed the uncrowned king of Hunslet. But he was a man of the people. He was straight talking with homely eloquence. However, he regularly used Anglo-Saxon words, and he became a member of the Leeds Library, and I'd have loved to have been a fly on the wall when he walked in there. Again, a deeply religious man, but this time a Methodist, but he had very strong political views because he didn't think that either the Liberal or the Tories did well by the working people, and he became president of the Leeds Political Union, in which he really did push for the reform of Parliament, the reform of the Corn Laws. He opposed state education in all its forms. And what I find so typical of him was he wasn't going to pay his church rates, and he had a total irreverent view of authority. These are his glassworks, absolutely spectacular. He lived on the edge of these, on what was known as his glass palace on Hillage Road, and he rode everywhere on his horse, which it said was of dubious pedigree, of questionable breed. And yet this man did so much good for the poor of Hunslet. He never forgot his roots. And this was what it was like inside. Kevin found this wonderful. What a great shot. And how warm must this have been. Imagine working in that environment all day. No wonder you wanted to go to the pub. And one of the great survivors of Hunslet is this, which is Burton House. Amazing that it's still there. And this was the home of Robert Booth, of the famous Booth family, the great cloth merchants of Leeds. And Robert lived here in the early part of the 19th century, and he travelled to Russia. He saw advantage in another kind of material, linen, and he had great connections with St. Petersburg and went across there to arrange the importation of flax for people like Marshall. And so what you have, Benyon Brothers, all these people need that raw material coming across from the Baltic to Hull, and then up the Aire and Calder navigation to mills on either side, like Ives and Atkinson's mills. He even had a little dabble himself, but his main thing was the importation. And again, the man is living in Hunslet. Now, someone that took advantage of this was John Wilkinson, 1799 to 1874. And he built these Hunslet mills, which of course are currently being refurbished by JM Construction. The site covered 8 acres, but the incredible thing about this is they employed 1,600 people within those bounds. He used the absolute best. William at Fairbairn, the Scottish civil and structural engineer based in Manchester, to make this a fireproof mill. Very latest technology in building as well. Now with all these glass works, vitriol works, glue works, woolen manufacturers, flax manufacturers, you need a good transport system. And apart from the Leeds to Wakefield Turnpike, this is the toll house on Low Road. The roads were not particularly wonderful, but in 1816, you get what we today call Dewsbury Road being opened. And very shortly after, in the 1820s, you get the road which took you across the river to York. And in 1828, we opened this bridge, now South Accommodation Road Bridge, which was to the design of, again, one of the great engineers of his age, George Leather. But road transport wasn't to bring engineering to Hunslet. The thing which brought engineering to Hunslet in spades was the railway, which of course Goodman had played such a part in. If you look to the centre of the screen, you will see where the station of the Leeds to Derby line was. You will know it better as Crown Point Retail Park. And why that was fantastic was that railway line you could link to if you had a factory to the side of it. And that's exactly what these great engineers, like the Kitsons, James Kitson here, and of course E.B. Wilson, who built the Jenny Lind. Now, this really was a revolution. And in the second half of the 19th century, Hunslet became internationally famous for the remarkable locomotives that were made within its bounds. But that is well-charted waters. You've seen the number of people who are employed in these mills coming from further and further away to try and find employment in a variety of different places. And you need housing for this. And this is unbelievable. This is an estate agent's plan for 1823. And it was a plan by John Holmes for what later became Ivory Street, Myrtle Street, and Gold Street. Holmes had created this street grid and informed potential purchasers that they had the privilege of making cellars under any road. And again, about dispelling myths, although some of the early housing have been thrown up, these houses that were built in this period, like Hall Street off Low Road, here, again, thanks to Leodis for their support, Leeds Libraries. What you have here are very well-built houses. And no, they don't have any tap water. And no, they're not at this moment connected to sewers. But these houses were well-built. They were built because people who purchased them wanted the rents to pay for them in old age. No old age pension. They wanted to generate an income for them. So even though they're built by speculative builders, people who invested in them were often looking to the future. And cleanliness is next to godliness. Although some of the housing was utterly appalling, more of which later, others of it was not. This is a poem which was written at the time about Hunslet and what happened in that man's house on a Saturday. When Saturday comes, what a bustle and throng. Everything in the house then seems to be wrong. Chairs, tables and beds are moved about. A warfare commences, the flies are drove out. The books, good and bad, are all piled on a heap. You've scarce time to stand ere your wife wants to sweep. What strange convulsions there are in each house. Caps, cans, kettle, dishes are thrown about loose. Cobwebs are brushed down. The dust of 1 week is all put in motion. You can hardly speak. If you say a word, your spouse is provoked and cries in a passion, she hopes you'll be choked. Fire irons, fenders, and so forth are rubbed, the floor too with water, and mop is well scrubbed. 'Tis then children cry for want of a nurse. Patience then is a prize, or a man would soon curse. who can bear such an uproar as this? But I'll say no more, since it is as it is. Now, who wrote that? This man, John Udall. John Udall had started life as a clothier, a domestic clothier, and as mechanisation took place, he found himself unemployed. And fortunately for him, he applied for the job as the toll collector on the new Leeds to Dewsbury Road. Now, he started to write poetry because every day when people arrived and they wanted to, he asked them for the toll money. Not surprisingly, he got a great deal of abuse, and he began to write little rhymes about these people, the neighbours who were kind and actually paid him his money. But then he went on to say all those that didn't, and almost name, blame, shame them. But my favourite one is the vicar who was there in his carriage with the lady of the night who, well, I won't go into any more detail about that, other than to say this man became such a key part of this community. He became the overseer of the poor, granting out relief to those who've fallen on hard time, with whom he empathised. And there's quite a bit in the 2 chapters, based on the lecture I'm doing today, about John Udall in the book. And part of his role was to keep people out of the workhouse. But I have to say that in terms of workhouses, Hunslet had a very good reputation. And nobody really wanted to go in there because, of course, the families were separated. He played a key theme at times, such as when cholera struck in Hunslet, both in 1832, 1834, 1849, and he was there. Now, we've just been through COVID, so I'm sure a great number of us will empathise with the fact that he was trying to make sure everybody had enough food. Everybody was warm, with warm clothing, clean clothing, sheets, blankets, enough money to survive with. He even tried to get the medicine from them. And so they, at the end of the cholera epidemic, 1849, presented him with this silver teapot, which is in the Leeds Museum collection. So if we've got the people trying to help their own, we also have the religious groups within Hunslet doing their bits as well. And the thing is with it, the Anglicans, they had their ladies going out and visiting the poor, trying to do something for the needy. But as that population quadruples, the old church of St. Mary's is no longer good enough. And so what they did, first of all, was employ the great architect Chantrell to put a tower on it, which of course you can see here, but they needed more capacity to get people in. And if you look to the right of your screen, what you have here is the gentleman who is Benjamin Ingham. Now, if you know where Brains Pressings is, to the side is a petrol station, and there was this house, Brookfield House, which is where the Ingham family came. They'd originally been cloth merchants from Ossett, but they travelled here in the Lake George in the late 18th century and settled. And they took over what were eventually Waterloo Mills, i.e. the cotton mills of Ard Walker, where they became greatly embroiled in the cloth finishing trade and the sale of cloth. And then in 1806, they sent their son here, Benjamin Ingham, with Hunslet cloth to Sicily to see if they could sell it there. When he got off his ship, what he was very impressed with was the wine, the Marsala wine. And when he tasted it, he thought, I am certain that I can make this wine taste better. And so he set out on a personal mission to transform the quality of the wine of Sicily. He was phenomenally successful. He sold it not only in this country, but also where it became extremely popular in America. He invested in America in a place called Manhattan Island. He also invested in the railways and also in the waterways. And because he became so wealthy, when he heard that the poor people of Hunslet needed great churches being constructed, he and his sisters gave thousands of pounds for new church accommodation within it. And everybody thought he was Saint Benjamin. And they all thought that he'd married a Sicilian princess, but in actual fact, he was living over the brush, which really amuses me. But hey ho, pressing on. And so we have great churches like St Jude's here, built with the money which he gave. Not only did the Anglicans try to care for the spiritual soul, but they also tried to educate the people. And this was the original 17th century school of Hunslet, which had basically been serving the community for 200 years. It was grossly and wholly inadequate. And so what there was a great drive to try and get children educated to be able to read, write, and do arithmetic, but also inculcated as Anglicans. And here we have the great Hunslet New National School, erected in 1843, to the designs of Chantrell again, but opened the following year. Now, if you think that a Methodist New Connection man like Joshua Bowers is going to sit back and let the Anglicans rule the day, you are sadly mistaken. He was having none of this at all. And so he was one of the main people behind the Methodist New Connection here. Now, Angel Wings building, which Union Industries, credit to them. What a fantastic job they've done at restoring it. And as you can see to the back of that, there were the schoolhouses, because again, he was having none of it. Now, if everybody's trying their best, if Hunslet's growing apace, is all well? Well, no, it isn't. There are consequences. Even at the start of the period I've been talking about, 1816, the Reverend Thomas Dunham Whittaker says, a greater change can scarcely be conceived in the character and appearance of the place now and of old. Under the Gascoignes and Nevilles, who in the medieval period and Tudor period lived in the great Hunslet Hall, the features of which were a great manor house and park, a slender and obsequious population, but quiet cleanliness and repose. Look at what it was. And then what he says, I need not expose the contrast. Now, one of the great things was people were working very long hours, 12, 14 hours, 6 days a week, often in very hot, unsafe environments, and many men turned to drink. And again, one of the features of the book is it deals with the growth of alcoholism, the growth in the number of pubs, the great brewers of the age, like the Tetleys, actually in Leeds, but on the border of Hunslet. And they tried to police themselves, did the people of Hunslet. And in the Thoresby Society, there is a thing which is called the Killingbeck Archive. And in the latter part, in the 1890s, a man called John Killingbeck, born in Hunslet, worked with his father on the history of Hunslet, which was tragically never published. But his children sent, in 1902, the box of all the material to the Thoresby Society. And in that box are not only 2 handwritten versions of the book he wanted to have in print, but some maps he had done, some photographs he had taken, and some fantastic drawings. And this one is fascinating, because if the people found that a man was drunk, he was abusing his family, and he wasn't turning up on time, they captured him, they strapped him into a wheelbarrow, and they put him round Hunslet so that everybody could poke fun and point derision at him. That didn't work. And because, and I think this is true, Hunslet became an enclave of alcoholism for quite a period. The Reverend Jabez Tunnicliffe, who was at Hunslet Baptist Church, decided that this couldn't go on. And so he founded the Band of Hope with a female who I hope to lecture on at another time. But it wasn't just the men who were struggling with the long working hours, the horrible environments, the dangers of what they saw every day. Poor people getting injured in machinery. These were very hazardous places to work. At times when children wouldn't sleep, mothers went to the local druggist and bought cordial containing an opiate to dope them. Many women took narcotics, and opium chewing was not infrequent. One medical gentleman who's seen people reduced to a state of bordering on delirium for want of means to purchase the usual laudanum dram. There was horrific child cruelty. There were accidents. There were indecent assaults like that which took place on poor Elizabeth Hewitt, who was working in Deal and Fenton's cotton mill. And on the 5th of October 1839, her overlooker, Benjamin Haywood, aged 50, was sent to court and prosecuted. And she received £5 compensation for the assault. And that's about a month's wages for that overlooker. The impact on health, John Udall, again, in 1833, in his book of poems, says, in many cases, the children have been employed too hard at too tender an age. And he wrote this: see yonder children, weak and small, from 6 to 12 years old, and all half starved, 'tis truth I'm telling, at 5 o'clock each morn they rise, rub their half-rested eyes, and leave their humble dwelling. 3 miles they walk along the lane, whether it snows or hails or rains, they must be there at starting. At 6 o'clock the bell rings in, immediately they must begin, or their poor backs be smarting. 'Tis 8 at night when they come out, hence 'twill be 9 or thereabout, ere they can reach their cottage. Thus 14 hours within a room, confined with weary bones, now home return they to their pottage. Our Britain, land of Bibles here, their infants sigh and drop a tear, for they are human creatures. They never reach the size they should, like tender flowers nipped in the bud, see their sickly features. Now, Charles Westcoat's sketchbooks are in the Thoresby Library, and this is one of my absolute favourite, one of his sketches. I alluded earlier to the kind of boom and bust economy of the times. They were either good and very good, or they were dreadful. People like Udall giving out relief, trying to give everybody enough just to get by, or else they're in the workhouse. Or another option was for the men to go on the tramp. And I think this is such an atmospheric drawing of these men on the toll road trying to find work. Another consequence which went on Wall Street, those which have been thrown up, like these on Ratton Row. Here they are, single room, 12 feet square. 12 feet square. They have no water. They have no toilet, privy. They are literally a trodden earth floor with a thatched roof. They are vermin ridden. They are dreadful. So there you have a floor in the waiting room, as you have in this shot, which is of course one of Charles Westcoat's very famous views of Leeds in 1826 with the polluted river. You're looking up, the Royal Armouries is there on the left hand side today, my former employer, and what you have of course is the polluted river. And it absolutely stinks with every form of sewage, dead dog, dead pig, you name it, it's in that river. But look to the skies as well. Again, chest infections caused by that. Disease is rife, typhus, typhoid, cholera, TB, all these a nightmare. You've not even anywhere to bury your dead. This was a real problem. When the cholera struck in 1832 and 34, there wasn't any room in St Mary's Churchyard, and there wasn't any room in any of the Methodists or other non-conformist graveyards, and so they had to bury them on what was then the edge of the moor. And this, of course, was the cholera grave in one of the fields there, now under the motorway. Disease is a problem, crime is a problem, particularly at times when the economy isn't surviving well. And here you are on Stocks Hill, marked A, and then the jail at B, and at the side of it, the jailer's house. And of course, they were arrested here before being taken into Leeds to be processed. But one of my favourite programmes on television is Peaky Blinders, and Hunslet had their form of Peaky Blinders. And they lived in what had been former miners' colliers' cottages here on Hunslet Hall Road. And they were involved not only in illicit gambling, particularly horse racing and boxing, but they were involved in scams, everything from coal delivery right the way through to scrap iron. And if you want to find out any more of that, you need to buy a book called The Remarkable Story of Hunslet. Now, you're struggling all the time. You are struggling, but everybody has to at some time meet the Grim Reaper, and there was a real problem here, a real major problem. And so what was fascinating was, within the high death rate, you had so many people dying in Hunslet, there had to be somewhere else for them to go. Unfortunately, Leeds had passed, Leeds Corporation, in 1842, the Leeds Burial Grounds Act, which gave them permission to purchase land for a cemetery. And so £1,100 was spent on the cemetery at Woodhouse Hill, which was opened in May 1845 and became the first municipal cemetery in the whole of the country. But I love the fact that normally Anglicans and nonconformists don't meet, so there should have been two separate chapels. But we need to save brass. So here there's only one chapel, but within its bounds, you have everything from the Bower family. Again, if you've never been to visit, the Bower Monument is just so large, you can't believe how it was erected in the first place. But many of the Leeds greats, Hunslet greats, including John Udall, are buried there. So the witching hour is nearly up. Here we are in 1781. Here we are in 1849 on Baines and Newsom, and just look how those fields are beginning to be broken up with all the building, not only of the mills, foundries, glassworks, etc., not only with the railways, turnpike roads, but also as well the working class housing. The great and the good have left Hunslet because of the pollution, and what you have instead is a constantly changing landscape. And yet, even amongst all this environment, you had one crop which was introduced, the favourite of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and it was called rhubarb. And Hunslet became one of the great rhubarb producing areas at Woodhouse Hill and Sturton Lodge. But I want to finish with what became the front cover of the book. This started off as a landslide in the Thoresby Society, black and white, very tiny, about 3 inches square. And my friend Peter Breers gave this so that Kevin and I could have this as the front cover of our book. And I just think this is so wonderful, because this is Hunslet Feast in 1850. It was the working class holiday that everybody looked forward to. And what you have here was families going out to enjoy themselves in their absolute finery. To the right, you've got the children looking at the Punch and Judy, the man with the big drum banging up business. As you're moving from right to left, you've got O'Brien's, who were famed for the worst quality drama of the age, seedy adult themes there, normally horror stories or murder. Across to the swing boats, and then to the stalls, serving everything from brandy snap right the way through to toys and oranges as well. And this was a great feature of Hunslet in the first week of August, throughout the entire period, right the way through to the 20th century. It was avoided like the plague by the great and good, but boy did the others have a great time. And that's what I hope you've had this evening. And of course, I'm here to shamelessly plug this book, The Remarkable Story of Hunslet, which Kevin and I have slaved away, and he's done such an amazing job editing the ramblings of Stephen Burt into a coherent and cohesive form. It's full colour throughout. And I'd just like to finish by thanking Leeds Civic Trust and the Thoresby Society for arranging this, particularly Martin and Anne. And it is a not-for-profit publication. I had great financial support from Leeds Philosophical and Literary Society, Leeds Civic Trust, and a benefactor who I know's out there, but obviously doesn't want to be named. But this has all meant that this 352-page full-colour hardback book can go for £20. Now, the only snag is it weighs 1.71 kilograms, so postage is prohibitively expensive. But thank you, Martin and the Civic Trust team, who are going to arrange for the sale, and you will all receive notification as to how to buy the books. I'm now open to any questions. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. That was even better than the rehearsal, dare I say it.
I'm glad I passed the audition, Martin.
No, that was fantastic, and you know, such a broad sweep of this sort of concentrated period in the history of Hunslet. I should say, because I know some people will have to leave, that the book itself starts off in the 11th century and goes right through to the present day. And I think this section of history is probably about 100 pages, maybe a bit less out of the 350. So this is very much a you know, a section of the book, but it covers far more ground than that. And we may well invite Steve back to talk about some of the other other insights that he's had through the book into the history of this area. So we've got time for a couple of questions. We are slightly over, but I think we'll take a couple. Yeah, someone's asked if we're going to have part 2 at 1850 onwards. So there you go. That's
thank you very much. Of course, it'd be a pleasure.
Well, and a lot of interest in the book on the chat here, so that's really good. Steve, could I just start off by asking a question about the politics in this area at the time? Could you sort of paint a picture of, you know, what the political backdrop was in Hunslet?
The key thing with Hunslet is that basically it becomes a working class area. And when you've got leaders in it like Joshi Bauer, he is a man of the people, and he has a dalliance with Edward Baines and the Liberal Party. And Baines finds, reading between the lines, this man is too common. He's foul-mouthed. He's not particularly articulate. When he addresses people, and I think today one of the things we forget is you're getting crowds of 10 to 30,000 people on Hunslet Moor. I mean, it's just incredible. They stand on carts and everybody in the crowd is waving their flags for a particular. What had happened in the 18th century is that the Tories had been led by Lord Lascelles of Harewood House, and he had basically alienated the clothier class big style by basically saying, well, it's tough if it's not economy. There's nothing anybody can do about it. You know, I hate these whinging clothiers. Well, he said this in London, and of course, what does the local press do? They report that he had basically dissed the clothier class. So in the 18th century, the Tories become phenomenally unpopular. What does Baines skillfully do? He then steps in and, you know, the Liberals will look after you. You must try and vote for us. But you have to remember, before the reform of the corporation, before the great reform for dealing with the MPs, these people, so few of them had the vote at all. So you're only dealing with a very tiny minority of Hunslet people being able to vote anyway. But what you get are the treats of the people. So the small number that can vote are treated to dinners in the local pubs. And in the book, I actually refer to that fact of the treats before and the treats after if they won. And so you have this combination of those who can't vote, those that can vote, the use of the moor for political rallies to whip up the great and the good. I mean, Joshua Bauer refers to them as me flock. You're out there, me flock. Follow me. And of course, when it came to the vote, they didn't. They voted instead for Baines. But it gives you a flavour, an essence of the churn with it. But because you'd got the first mayor of Leeds in terms of not the MPs, but in terms of the council, the first mayor of Leeds under the Reform Corporation is, of course, Goodman, George Goodman. So one of the great things for Hunslet is they had at the very highest level people batting for them. So it's a mixed bag, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, thank you. People are just asking, so just before people disappear, yes, we are recording this, so it may take a day or two, but we will forward a link to the Trust YouTube channel. So if you've got friends who you think would like to watch this afterwards, or you want to watch it again, then that's absolutely possible. We will enable that for you. Just a couple of things to mention then, Steve. Hunslet Hall Road. Why is it so called? Where was Hunslet Hall?
Hunslet Hall Road is quite naturally named after the hall at Hunslet, which today it was on the site of the. If you travel up there into the Northcote estate, you'll find Salvation Army Hall there, and that is where the hall was. And this hall dates right back to the medieval period. It was first constructed by the Hay family, and they go on to become the lords of the manor. And then it falls into the Gascoigne family, who become enormously wealthy. And then what happens is one of the Gascoignes marries into the Neville family, and all goes well for the people of Hunslet. This agricultural settlement, the Nevilles are really excellent landlords. They look after their elderly, they look after those who fall on hard times. And then one of their number becomes involved in the rising the North against Elizabeth I. And what happens there is he unfortunately loses everything. He's committed for treason, he flees to the continent, and the estate is basically leased to one of the great, how should we put it, ruthless money men of late Tudor England called the Careys. And the Careys, they basically couldn't give a damn about the people of Hunslet. And that's quite an interesting, well, it's a very interesting period in the history of Hunslet, which of course I deal with in the book.
Couple more things before we close. Someone's asked about the printing industry and the importance of the printing industry, Petty's, for example. I mean, I'm guessing that comes later in the history of Hunslet.
It does indeed, and of course it wasn't just the printing industries like Alf Cooks is probably, the Queen's printer as she became known. It's not just that; it's the printing presses which were manufactured as well, and it did become at the heart of it. But again, what's fascinating? It's all about interconnectivity. You start with why is Hunslet developing at that period? It has the coal from it had was the Careys couldn't care less about Hunslet, so they divided it up into small estates. Part of those estates were on the flat river alluvial beds at the side, which were perfect for factories. So what you had was land which is in the hands of the aristocracy, flat sites in which you can build huge engineering works, printing works, and the rest. So you're getting this interconnectivity of the railways lead to the steam engines. All these people needing printing products, don't they, to advertise their ware? So then you're starting to get your local printers getting involved in that. And that's everything from calendars right the way through to the stationery. And one of the great survivors, of course, how we know what some of those buildings like is, like the Brains, they paid the local printers to have their buildings on the top of their letterheads because they were so proud of it. So we know Brains 1913 building, which is still there today, but in the Thoresby archive, we've got one of their earlier buildings look like because it's a letterhead. So yes, the printing industry does come in the latter part, and it isn't just printing on paper, and it isn't just calendars, it's sheet music, it's packs of cards, and of course what you then get is printing on tin, and of course the famous OXO cube tin, which was designed and manufactured within our bounds. But that's another story, isn't it?
Absolutely. Right, we are running out of time, so I'm just going to Just to say thanks for all the chat and the comments. Lots of interesting insights. People with connections to the area. People asking questions about what's in the book. We don't have time to cover all of that. There is, but suffice to say, there is a lot in the book. It's 350 pages. It does, cover many of the things that people are raising. Could you just finish off, Steve, by giving your impressions of Hunslet today? Someone asked the question, it may be someone who isn't in Leeds or isn't even in the country. Someone's asked the question, what's Hunslet like today?
Well, Kevin did a great job on the last chapter, and he wrote quite extensively about that. But my thing is, of course, I'm interested in the people of Hunslet. And I have to say, I've had such a warm welcome from the people who are proud to be from Hunslet. And I think it is that pride in the place that underpins absolutely everything, and one of the great sadnesses to me as you chart the history is, of course, it used to be one of those great sporting centres where everybody was, and there's almost been a rebirth of the sport as well. Great tragedy, of course, when Parkside Ground is sold, but it's the fact it's almost like a rebirth going on at the moment, because you've got the traditional families of Hunslet proud to be there, thriving. You've got the new flats down by the river, bringing more people and a different sort of person to Hunslet. So you've got a vibrant, changing landscape, and at the same time, you've got a reinvestment in the industries of Hunslet, and they are so varied. I think that is the great strength of that area, and there are still vacant sites which can be developed. But you've everything from Union Industries, Coracote, right the way to the traditional people, Vickers Oils, Allied Glass, you've Siemens Engineering, you've Brains Press. You've got all those wonderful, wonderful companies who, again, very proud to be in Hunslet, and yet you have the families that have been there for generations, like the Carr family, Janine Steele at Stinson's Wallpapers, great help, Sid Reed. You can go on and on, enthusing about those people who want Hunslet to be a success. And if you've got that level of support at community level and also at business level, I think that the area of Hunslet has got an exceptionally bright future looking ahead. And I think if you pass through it today, Leeds City Council are doing a great plastic feature in the book, all about improving the actual infrastructure of the area. And isn't it great that there is still the landmark spire there, which I use all the time? We need that to look spectacular now, because I think that would almost be a symbol of that rebirth, and we shall we say chiming in the changes.
Been mentioned about the spire, so I'm glad you mentioned that at the end. Look, that was a great way to end the talk, and gives, I think, whets people's appetite for more talks. So let's see if we can encourage Steve to do that in the months to come.
I'm very happy to do that, and of course I will be able to share with you detailed history of Hunslet Hall with its Tudor mansion and its viewing platform across the moors of Hunslet. Paints a vivid picture.
So just to finish off then, thank you, Steve, for a fantastic talk. Lots of people asking, where can I get the book? So just to say this once more, I will be sending an email out tomorrow to everyone who attended, but also people who couldn't attend but registered. They will be getting an email tomorrow, all of you, with details of how you can obtain the book. There'll probably be two options. The option to collect them from the trust, but we'll tell you how that can be done. We may also offer a postal option, but as Steve says, you may need to take out a mortgage if you want to do that. But we can offer that, so we can work out what the cost would be, and if people want to do that, then that's a possibility as well. but we'll let you know through an email tomorrow how you can do that, because I can see from the chat that lots of people are interested. Yes, postal option is essential for me. We will give you a postal option and we'll work out what that will cost.
And there'll be eventually venues in Hunslet as well, Martin.
Plenty of venues. Yes, other
later
places
down
in
the road.
Absolutely, yeah. Great. Okay, well, we'll finish on that. Thank you once again, Steve. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. It's been a great occasion, and I hope to see you all very soon at another event, either from the Thoresby or from the Trust, or maybe another joint event like this one. So thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much.